Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode number 435 of For Immediate Release. I'm Neville Hobson.
And I'm Shel Holtz. I was reading an article the other day by Brian Doubles, the CEO of Synchrony, which is a financial services company that offers consumer finance products. My Chevron gas station credit card is a Synchrony product. Doubles wrote in Fortune that amidst all the CEO calls for employees to return to the office, he's had no second thoughts maintaining Synchrony's policy, which I can best sum up as whatever. Want to work from the office? Fine. Work from home? That's fine too. Want to be hybrid? You got it. Doubles does ask employees to live close enough to an office that they can get there for occasional meetings, training, and culture events. This policy stemmed from a survey of employees who said they wanted to be able to have work at home as an option and have access to the office from time to time without concern about it threatening their career or being seen as a negative. Now, despite everything we're hearing from the CEOs who are justifying the return to office mandate, Synchrony, using its approach, has risen to fifth on the Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list. That's up from 51st in 2019. And 95% of Synchrony employees say it's a great place to work and that the company's way of working gives them the flexibility they need. So what's going on with all of this justification that other CEOs are providing for their mandates for everybody to come back 5 days a week? We're going to dive into that right after this. In the article he wrote, Doubles explains that what Synchrony did to make this approach work, including making in-person events matter, adopting coaching culture, supporting career journeys no matter where the employees are situated, and measuring outcomes versus time in the office are what really drove this success. And by the way, on that last one, Doubles says the company has seen stronger productivity and business outcomes. Employee turnover is lower. The company has experienced a 30% increase in job applications. Meanwhile, CEOs everywhere are insisting that having employees in the office produces key benefits. These include enhanced collaboration, the belief that physical proximity leads to spontaneous interactions, brainstorming sessions, and seamless communication. But yeah, spontaneous interactions can occur in an office setting, but the forced nature of return to office mandates have proven to result in employee dissatisfaction and resistance rather than genuine collaboration. They also argue that you get stronger company culture, the idea that shared physical spaces cultivates a unique organizational culture and reinforces company values. And the big one, they believe that you get better productivity when people are in the office. The assumption is that in-office work environments minimize distractions and facilitate better oversight, leading to higher productivity levels. These, it's important to point out, are myths. For example, a recent survey found that only 1 in 3 executives who imposed return to office mandates saw even a slight positive impact on productivity. Doubles calls this a failure of imagination on the part of leaders everywhere. And while these points have some merit, we really have to examine whether these assumptions hold true in the current work landscape. Recent studies and expert analyses offer a more nuanced perspective. Let's start with collaboration and connection. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review recently that agrees that in-person work can facilitate spontaneous interactions, but that doesn't necessarily lead to meaningful collaboration. The quality of interactions rather than their frequency or spontaneity is what truly drives effective teamwork. Next, let's turn to employee satisfaction and retention. Data from the Great Places to Work organization suggests that rigid return to office mandates can negatively impact employee satisfaction and retention. Employees who have autonomy over their work environment tend to exhibit higher engagement and are more likely to stay with their organizations. And as for productivity metrics, findings from Gallup reveal that remote workers often match or exceed the productivity levels of their in-office counterparts. The flexibility of remote work can lead to better work-life balance, which in turn enhances overall performance. The fact is, the research finds that meaningful connections develop through intentional engagement, not just physical presence. And while a physical presence coupled with efforts to create meaningful connections can produce these results, careful thought and planning can produce meaningful opportunities for connection and collaboration, regardless of where employees are doing their jobs. Organizations like Synchrony are achieving success by focusing on intentional engagement strategies rather than arbitrary office attendance requirements. Now, I raised this issue a few months ago, but it's worth reiterating in light of this data about what truly drives connection and collaboration. We have to stop acting like remote or hybrid work is temporary. We have to stop using patchwork methods for engaging with employees, for guiding their career aspirations, for managing them, and for keeping the culture strong. We have to help our organizations and leaders figure out how to develop practices based on remote and hybrid work being the way business is done in the post-COVID era. Understanding employee preferences is crucial for this kind of success. Surveys indicate that a significant portion of the workforce values the flexibility that remote work offers. For example, a study by Buffer found that 97% of employees would like to work remotely at least some of the time, indicating a strong preference for the flexibility that remote work provides. And companies that offer flexible work arrangements are more attractive to top talent. Rigid return to office policies could deter potential candidates who prioritize work-life balance and autonomy. Now, this is a podcast about communications, and there is a role for internal communicators here. This is an opportunity to help leadership understand that effective collaboration stems from well-designed processes and cultural support, not physical proximity. The key is shifting the conversation from where work happens to how it happens most effectively.
It's a big topic, is it not? It actually, what you've highlighted, I think, suggests strongly that all those organizations whose leaders are saying to people and demanding they return to the office 5 days a week are nuts. They don't understand the way of things. I think, listening to what you were saying, I was thinking to myself, if I were working for an organization that that had a policy of coming back to the office, the best way to do this is the hybrid approach. And you mentioned surveys talking about what employees themselves value and what they would like to do, which speaks to that. It seems to me that you'd like the option to work at home or the office, whatever suits you. And that financial services company you spoke about, that's their approach in the sense of, whatever works. So you work at home or wherever, go to the office when you need to meet with someone perhaps, or because you feel like going into the office that day to see people. It wouldn't appeal to me to be working 100% away from the office. I'd like to go into the office. I think, though, the question in my mind is, if this is so, and the arguments are compelling, that the enforced return to everyone 5 days a week to the office is not a good thing to do at all, what needs to happen then for those companies? And there are many of them here in the UK as well. I read now and again about such a company is implementing a return to work policy. How do you deal with that?
It's a challenge, because I think what's driving a lot of this is not what the leaders of these organizations are saying is driving it. I think there are some hidden agendas here. I think that there is pressure from governments, for example, to get people back into downtown corridors to support local businesses, the dry cleaners and the bistros and the sundry shops, the 7-Elevens, the Starbucks and the like, that have been suffering because people are not working downtown. They're not coming out during lunch and availing themselves of these services. I think there's also the leases that these organizations are paying for these buildings that are sitting empty or half empty, and some pressure to have people come in and occupy those spaces. I think there are probably some other issues that are driving this. And what you're hearing is that this whole collaboration and connection thing, this is the excuse that they're making, even though there isn't really data to support it. So I think what
Yeah.
you need to do is look at bottom line effectiveness of what's happening in these organizations that have embraced remote and hybrid as just the way things are now. Companies like Synchrony, and look at what they're doing in order to make it work. I mean, they've reconfigured their spaces in the buildings that Synchrony owns to accommodate cultural events and big meetings and get-togethers that reinforce the culture without saying you need to be here every day just so you can sit at your desk and do whatever it is that you would have done at home without having to go on that commute.
I was reading as well the Harvard Business Review piece, and there's a really interesting section that speaks to this directly, and it sets it out pretty well, I think. Let me read this bit. So what might be happening when employers issue return to office mandates? Colleague connection may increase, says HBR, because employees are milling about the same office and benefiting from random and serendipitous interactions. But at the same time, leader connection might decrease because employees feel their supervisors don't understand their motivations or don't care about the impact of the return to office mandate on their autonomy and their lives. Employer connections can also take a dive, as the desire to work hard to see the company succeed is undermined by a feeling of betrayal. And without clear and unambiguous links to why employees need to be back in the office, role connection can be negatively impacted, as people believe they're being evaluated based on their attendance more than their performance. I think that's absolutely spot on, that assessment, in my view. I think there is that, and I try and visualize myself in that situation. I would feel the same, I think. And you might also feel that I'm coming to the office because they told me I have to, in which case that's not a good start to doing this. And your own productivity is likely to be heavily impacted, because when you're in the office under those circumstances, you're going to be chatting with people. They're going to come up to you and say hi, and suddenly you're in that sort of environment, rather than be focused on meeting with someone to pursue a project or do something. I mean, you might do some of those things, but the climate, as it were, is not conducive to any of that, because of the combination of the fact you have to be there, so that's why you're there, the feeling of betrayal. And if there is lack of trust in your manager, the thing is doomed, because elsewhere, and indeed Gallup talks about this, that skilled managers, the ability to coach their teams, experience much greater productivity and all the stuff that goes along with that than teams that don't have a manager like that, or a supervisor. I don't see any, and it's interesting what you say, Shel, where you think there's, it's like governments are interfering with this. I'm sure it's similar in the US, but here in the UK, you've got empty office buildings everywhere, and companies are struggling to fill them. They've got to pay the rents and so forth. So that's an incentive for them to persuade people to come back to the office. But many of those businesses you talked about, the dry cleaner, the bistro, have closed and gone. They're not there anymore. And so in this country, and this is probably different to the States, I'm sure, public transport, broadly speaking, in most big cities is truly pot luck, frankly, whether that train is actually going to arrive and get you there on time. And the stress is dreadful. I hear this all the time from friends of mine who do commute into London in particular, but also Manchester. So all of those things are drivers to make you want to perform well from your home office, or go in, or go in at a time that isn't the old traditional rush hour. It's far more likely that it's going to be valuable if you do that way. It just seems to me crazy to insist on these mandated returns to offices. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, evaluating people on attendance is ridiculous.
Crazy.
The company does not succeed. No, there's not a business analyst out there that evaluates the performance of a company or its desirability as an investment based on how many employees show up at the office. Those are not outputs that they're looking for. There are other things that we hear about that are important to employees. Young employees need to be seen and mentored. But again, I think what we're doing is looking at this as temporary. So we're figuring out, well, how do we do this for now until we can get people back in the office and mentor them and coach them the way that we are accustomed to, rather than identifying new means of doing this, which is where we have to go. We have to find ways to make people visible, to have them mentored by various people in the organization, to coach them effectively as a manager when they are working remote or hybrid. It can be done. There are organizations like Synchrony that are doing it quite well. Look at the fact that their turnover rate has dropped as a result of this.
Yeah.
So I agree with what Mr. Doubles said, the CEO of Synchrony. It's a failure of imagination on the parts of leaders who say the only way that we can make this work is going back to the way things used to be. It's employees have moved on from this.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So it's a leadership issue more than anything else. Yet I worry that nothing will make this change. And if anything, you're going to see the pressure increasing for people to go back to the office. Here in the UK, what I've seen in mainstream media now and again in the past few months are the calls for this getting stronger and more forceful. It was like insisting this is going to have to be the only way these companies will survive is all the employees to go back to the office. And even, and this, I know we've touched on this sort of area before, but those are the companies that seem to me to have people in roles of power and influence who are adamant that they're not going to allow working from home anymore. And you've got to come to the office. And the unspoken bit to me certainly is so we can control you, we can know what you're doing and stop you doing stuff we don't want you to do. I mean, look at the story that was topical here recently. One of the big banks here, National Westminster Group, issued a statement publicly that picked up a lot of attention that they prohibit employees using WhatsApp and they're not allowed to use the communication methods that are unofficial. Translation: we don't want you using encrypted messaging apps because we can't see what you're saying. Now, it turns out that there was something bigger behind the scenes on this, that this was to do with something happened in the US with companies and employees using third-party apps that were very risky. So there was issues surrounding that, pressure put on the UK to do the same. That led to this, it seems. Yet that is totally ridiculous, frankly, to do that. But I get it. There are people who don't get it, and they are in positions of control in organizations to make some of these edicts out there or put them out there. So in this context, though, they seem to be getting it wrong completely. And you've mentioned some of them, and I think the one that struck me in particular was regarding that financial services company. You mentioned that they have gone up to 51st or higher even than that as one of the best companies in America to work for.
They were 51st. Now they're, I think, 5th.
Fifth, right, exactly.
I mean,
so in
that's
5 years,
quite a dramatic improvement.
It is. So that's what other people are saying about them. And so surely these organizations that are insisting people go back to the office because that's the new terms and conditions of your employment are head in the sand, it seems to me. I mean, I don't know what else to draw upon itself, but it doesn't seem a very good idea to insist on this.
No, and I think your top performers who have been forced to come back to the office, when they get a call from a recruiter saying, we have a position for you and you can work remote, they're going to be very inclined to take that. And you're going to see these companies lose the cream of the crop from their employee populations, and they're going to be left with the mediocre employees who can't get a job elsewhere and keep coming to the office because they just don't have a choice.
So you mentioned earlier when you were laying out this whole situation, an opportunity for community. So what advice would you say, or what tips would you give to fellow communicators who are in an organization that is insisting on returning to the office? What could they do to try and influence opinion to change that?
Well, I think leaders are motivated by data. So whatever data you can pull together, and I think it's a combination of what your own employees are saying. Remember, employee voice is a critical component of employee engagement. So elevate that voice and let the leaders know how employees are feeling and what they're thinking, and combine that with the fact that, I mean, only 1 in 3 CEOs with return to office mandates saw even a little bit of productivity improvement. Meanwhile, the ones that continue to have remote and hybrid are performing quite well from a productivity standpoint. And then you might want to propose some communication channels or communication activities that are new to the organization that support the idea of connection and collaboration with a hybrid or a remote workforce that the organization can start to employ on a regular basis, or at least experiment with, so that we're not just using something that's cobbled together to get us through until everybody's back in the same place.
Good tips.
And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.
Yeah, it's a big topic.